Hi. Before we go over the VPN setup, I'd like to go over some of the customizations I recommend doing once you've set up UTM 9. So we'll go ahead and log into WebAdmin. And one of the first things that I like to do is change some of the options for WebAdmin under user preferences. And so there are a number of shortcuts here that conflict with common shortcuts on Windows. If you're using a Mac, then this isn't a problem, but if you're on Windows, you can see here a shortcut to interfaces is Control-C. So if you're trying to copy something and you hit Control-C, it opens up this interfaces menu. So I don't really use any of these. If you want to change the shortcut to something else, you can do that, but I'm just going to go through and turn these all off. And then make sure to hit apply, and now it's saved. And another option is the items per page. Anytime something comes up in a list, it will only show you 10 items, and then you have to hit next and previous to flip through the different pages. So I prefer to have this higher. You can set it to whatever you want. So you make your selection there and then hit apply. And then under advanced, we want to set the timeout. So we'll just leave this at the default. If you want to set this to a shorter time, you can do that. I would not recommend disabling that or setting it to a very long time. Since this is a sensitive application, you wouldn't want to accidentally leave it open on your computer and have other people be able to access it. So the next thing that I'd like to do is to clear up this not secure SSL warning at the top here. So in order to do that, we need to go over to the HTTPS certificate tab, and we need to see what hostname is being used. So this was something that would have been set during the initial setup, so we'll go ahead and just copy that, and then we'll go over to definitions and users, and then network definitions, and then we'll filter this by host just so we can see what's going on. So what we need to do is create a network definition for the firewall itself so that we can assign that host name to it. So we'll create a new network definition. I'll just call it firewall. You can name it what you'd like. We change the type to host, and then we need to change the IP address here to the firewall's IP address. And we'll expand the DNS section, and we'll paste in that host name that we saw from the other screen. And then I usually like to turn reverse DNS on also, but you can leave that off if you want. It's not required. So now we'll hit save, and so now our firewall's domain will resolve to its IP address on this internal network. So obviously here we're just using example.com because this is a demonstration. This isn't a production system. You would want to choose either .local or use a domain that you actually have registered. So now that we have that set up, we'll need to go back over to management, WebAdmin settings, HTTPS certificate, and then we'll want to click on import CA certificate, and that will download a copy of the WebAdmin CA certificate for us to install on this computer. So now what you'd want to do is click it to open it, and then go to open, install certificate, and then we can leave it on current user. You can change it to local machine if you'd like to do that. Hit next. Place the certificates in the following store, and we want to choose Trusted Root Certification Authorities. Hit OK, next, finish, and yes to confirm. Hit OK, and OK to close that. Now, just to make sure that the settings are picked up, we'll go ahead and just quit out of the browser and reopen it. And now we'll want to access WebAdmin not by the IP address, but by our domain that we just set. Port 4444. And now we don't have that horrible not secure warning up there. So if you're using a publicly trusted certificate here because you have a real domain that's registered to you, then obviously you wouldn't have to do the that process where we download the CA certificate and add it to our trusted store. There's a whole other process for that, and we'll go ahead and I'll show you that. I don't have one to upload, but I'll show you where the screen is in case you want to do that. And it is recommended, if you're using a real public domain that is registered to you, that you use a certificate that's publicly trusted also, and that way if your users need to connect to the user portal remotely, or you need to connect to WebAdmin remotely, they're not going to get that privacy warning. So if you want to replace the certificate for WebAdmin and not use the self-signed certificate, you'll notice over here in WebAdmin and HTTPS certificate under WebAdmin settings that you have an option to select one, but there isn't an option to upload one. You just go over to Certificate Management and you can just click that and it'll take you there. And so go up to New Certificate. You can name it, and we'll go to Upload. And for file type, you would choose whatever applies. So you do have to combine the key and the certificate into one file. So there's no way to upload them separately. So that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video here. We might make another video on that in the future about how to use a publicly trusted certificate. But you do have to upload the key and the certificate combined into one. And if your certificate provider has an intermediate certificate, then you'll need to include that as well, otherwise you may get some SSL warnings. So once you save it here, then it would just show up in the list and you can choose it from the drop down and hit apply and it'll update that. But for now we'll just use the self-signed certificate. Okay, so the next thing that we'd want to do after that setup is to create a user, and this user is going to be preferably your name or someone else who's going to be using the system's name. You can log in as admin, but for security reasons it's recommended that every user have their own account and that you don't just use the admin for everything. So you should choose a very secure password for the admin user that you don't use for anything else, and that would be the user that you log into if you have to get into WebAdmin. And then if you have to log into the user portal for yourself or log into your VPN connection, you would use your personal account that's created with your name. So we'll go ahead and just create a new user here. And that's actually not where that goes. That would go here. And this is the short username. And then you could put in whatever email address that this user has. And then authentication will set to local. So you can actually change this if you bind the firewall to an Active Directory server or to an LDAP server. You can have remote authentication where it will use your Active Directory password. And that's recommended if you have the facility to do that. If you do have an Active Directory server or some LDAP, Apple Open Directory or anything like that, it's recommended to join the firewall to those servers, and then any of your user accounts should be tied to directory users or directory groups and not just have local passwords. But for this demo, we're just going to use the local account. So choose a secure password. And then for security reasons, if you know that this user is only going to be accessing the system from a certain IP address, you can set that here. And so if they try to log in from an IP address other than this one, it won't work. But we'll leave that off because we don't know where we're going to be when we need to log into the VPN. Under Advanced User Settings, this is for the email filtering, which we don't have set up, so we'll just leave that alone and hit Save. Now we've got our user saved here. So to set up our VPN account, there are two sections that you'd look at. There's site-to-site VPN, which as the name implies is for connecting two sites together. So if you have two UTM appliances, you can connect those together. Or if you have other types of systems, you can connect those too. If it's IPsec compatible, you can do that. or you can connect to Amazon, which is a pretty cool feature. So what I recommend, if you're doing site-to-site VPN, if you have the ability, if you have 2 UTMs or you have a UTM and some other OpenSSL compatible device, I would go with the SSL because it's a lot more reliable. IPsec is great if you can get it to work, but SSL VPN is a lot easier to get set up and running, and it's a lot more stable in my experience. So we're not going to do that in this video, but this is where you would do it. So what we're interested in is remote access VPN, and this is what we would use to connect a single computer remotely back to our main network here. So again, I recommend using the SSL VPN. You can choose any of these other types, but again, unless you have a reason not to, I would just use SSL VPN. So what we'll do is go to create a new remote access profile, and then profile name. This is a neat system, because what you can do here is either have a profile for each user, or if you have a group of users, you can use groups to apply the settings to that whole group without having to create a separate profile for each user. So that's really handy, especially if you have a directory server. If you have a system where every user is supposed to have VPN capabilities, then all you have to do is add your remote access group or your domain users group from AD into the groups section here and save it, and that's all you have to do. Anyone who has an Active Directory account or other directory account can just connect to the VPN. They can log into the user portal, download their profile, and connect to the VPN without you having to go in here and make changes. And the same applies and the opposite. If you have an employee that leaves, you can just delete them out of your directory server, and you don't have to mess with anything here. Their VPN will just stop working. So that's a really nice feature. But in this case, we're just going to have it set up with one user. So we'll add our test user in here. And for local networks, this is going to be any network that you want that user to be able to connect to through the VPN. If you only want them to be able to connect to your internal network, then you just drag in internal network. If you do want internet traffic to forward from that computer through the VPN and exit through your UTM, then you'd have to add internet also. And you can choose if you want IPv6 in there as well. So with this configuration, any traffic going from that remote computer that's trying to get to the internal network or that's trying to get to the internet will be tunneled through the VPN and will be routed from the UTM here to either the internet or the appropriate internal area. So if you only have one internal network, or you want everyone to be able to connect to any internal network from the VPN and also the internet, a quick way to set this up is to just put any in here. And then this means that any traffic at all that tries to exit that remote computer will get tunneled through the VPN, and then the UTM will figure out what to do with it. So if you go ahead and choose automatic firewall rules on this screen, and you have an any configuration, or if you don't have that and you just have internal network only, then automatic firewall rules will allow any traffic going from that computer to these networks without any other filtering. So that's something to consider if you do have an isolated network, like you have your internal network and then you have another one with some servers on it. Then you may not want to have automatic firewall rules on. You might want to configure those more specifically, so you could allow any traffic to internal and then maybe only the web ports into the server network or whatever type of servers are on there. You may want to only allow certain ports. So that's something to be aware of. In this case, we're just going to go with the automatic firewall rules, and we'll go with any also, because we'll want internet traffic to forward and we'll want internal access or internal traffic to forward as well. But if you don't want your remote users' internet traffic to go through the VPN, then don't use any. You'll have to explicitly define other internal networks to do that. So we'll just set that to any and then hit save, and we'll close out of that. So now we have our profile created. So what we'll need to do now, if you want to download the profile for that user for them and then give it to them, or you're going to be setting up their account, what you can do from there is you go over to definitions and users, go down to users and groups, you check the box next to that user, and then you go up here to the action menu and you can say download appropriate VPN configurations. So if you don't want to do that, or they're going to do it themselves, what we'll need to do is set up the user portal, and that will allow your users to log in and download their own VPN information. So we'll go over to user portal, we'll go ahead and turn that on, and then it's yellow, which means it's not actually on yet. We just have to configure a few things first before it will enable itself. So what we'll have to do is choose allowed networks, and we just want to have any. So that means if they're internal or they're on the internet, wherever they may be, they can log into the user portal. If you have certain security restrictions, then you can restrict that down. If you only want them to be able to access their VPN information while they're already inside the network, then you can just list your internal network there and leave the internet off, or leave any out of there, leave internet out of there, and then they can't download the configuration if they don't already have it if they're off your network. So I like to leave that on, or leave it set to any, because that way if you have a user that needs their VPN information and they're out of town or away from the office, they can just log in wherever they are and get it. So we'll go ahead and hit apply, and now our switch is green, which means it's fully enabled. And if we go to advanced, we can see some extra options. For example, you can disable certain items if you don't want users to be able to access them. So if you only want VPN information showing up, then you would check everything except for VPN related items. And so now, even if you have this other stuff turned on, the only thing that's going to show up is VPN. So we'll go ahead and undo that and just let anything that's configured show up. And this doesn't necessarily mean that all of these items will show up if they're not checked. They'll only show up if they're applicable to a certain user. So right now our test user has VPN configured, so if that test user logs in, they'll be able to download a VPN configuration. But if you log in with a different user, or the admin user that we have not configured a VPN for, they will not have a remote access or VPN tab in the user portal, since they don't have any of that configured. And then once we configure it, then it'll show up. So this is showing you that the default port is 443, which is just the standard HTTPS port. So all you have to do is go to your firewall's domain with HTTPS and leave off the port. It'll use 443 by default, and it'll listen on any address. So this is important also. If you have on this other screen allowed networks any, but you choose down here not any, but you have your internal address, then and then you save that, then they'll only, and that's fine, it's just letting you know that this is conflicting with SSL VPN, but that's not a problem. It'll still work, so we just hit OK anyway. So now, even though you have this other screen set to any, it's not going to work outside of this interface. Only clients that can access this interface will be able to get to user portal. So we don't want that. We want that to be any. But something else you can do, if you have multiple WAN addresses, then you may not want this to be any, because then port 443 is going to be tied up on all of those interfaces. So if you have to access another server inside your network and you just want that to be NATed through, where you can just go to some IP address or domain at port 443 to be able to access a secure web server that's inside your network, if you have this set to any, you may have some problems getting that to work. So in that case, you may need to specify a specific WAN address that you can access, and then configure your server to use the other address. So we'll just leave this on any and 443, that's fine. And then again, we're just warned here that it is using the same address that's set up and the same port that's set up for the SSL VPN, but that's perfectly fine. That's not going to cause any problems. We'll just hit OK to bypass that. And also, you can customize your welcome message. We'll see where that shows up once we log into the user portal. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. So if we go to our domain here, we don't want the web admin port, and we want to make sure that we're set to HTTPS. So once we do that, the user portal will load. It'll look almost exactly like the web admin screen, except it says log into user portal instead of web admin. So we'll log in with our test user and our test user password. And then once we're logged in, we'll be greeted with our welcome message. And this is exactly what is showing up down here. Welcome to the portal. So if we go here, you can see welcome to the user portal. It's exactly what it said down there. So that's just standard HTML. You can change this to whatever you want. You can use inline styles and customize it to your heart's content. So we'll just leave this, it's fine for now. So what we do have, the applicable options, since this is a local account, it's not remotely authenticated, we do have a change password option. So if you do decide to go with local accounts, you can set a temporary password and then instruct your users to log in and change it later. If you have directory services turned on and this is a remotely authenticated user, then this is not going to be effective. It may not even show up. Remote access is what we're interested in. This is how you download your VPN configuration information. And you have some really nice options that are just included right here to make it as easy as possible for you. So this is a complete installation package, including the client software, keys, and automatic configuration for any late Windows software or operating system. So what's going to happen here, you'll download this, if you're on Windows that is, and you haven't already installed this. And it will download an exe that you run, and it will install the client software and all of your, like it says here, all of the keys and configuration for you. So you don't have to know anything about how VPNs work to get this working. That's very simple. So we'll go ahead and run through that just so you can see what it looks like. And we'll hit next, agree, and we'll just leave the default location for it to install. And then it is going to install a virtual network adapter, so that's fine. Just hit install and hit next, and we're finished. So now what we'll see, if we look over, well actually it's down here, it is a traffic light. So it's also going to be in our start menu, Sophos SSL VPN client, so if it's not in your system tray, then you can launch it from here. So it has this handy icon to let you know what the status is. The red light means it's not connected, the amber light in the middle means that it's attempting to connect, and the green light means that it is currently connected. So if we right click on that, we can see that we have a few options. You can connect, view the log, check the settings. There's nothing that you really need to change that's in here, so unless you specifically know that you need to modify one of these options, just leave it alone. And this basically is just OpenVPN GUI that's been customized by Sophos to have their icons in there. So we'll go ahead and hit connect to show you what that looks like. So it asks for a username and password. So even though it's asking for a username and password, this package that you download will only work with the user for which it was downloaded. So if we try to log in as any other valid user, it's not going to log in. And the reason it does that is because the authentication that the system uses is multi-factor. So it has the password that it's asking for here, but there's also a certificate that it sends back to the server that's unique to the user that was used to download the VPN package. So if you try to sign in with a different user, the password will be right, but the certificate won't match, so you'll get an authentication error. So we'll just go ahead and log in here. And then as you can see, we have our red and amber lights, and it says it's connecting. And once it's finished, it says it's connected. It has been connected, and here's our internal IP address that we've been issued for the VPN connection. So now what we can do is view our status here. If you need to check when it was connected and what IP address it is, just hover over the icon and you'll see that. You can also right-click on it and go to Show Status, and it'll show you all the steps that were used to connect to the VPN. So if you have any problems with it and you know anything about networking and VPNs, this is helpful to see what step it might have failed at, or if there was a specific error message that you can correct. So we'll just go and close out of that. So now we can see we're still connected. We have our traffic light. If we go back into Chrome, if we go back into Web Admin and go to Remote Access, as an administrator, you can see what users are logged in. And so we see we have this IP address and this user that is connected right now. So we'll go ahead and disconnect from that. We'll right-click and go to Disconnect. So it should be very straightforward for your users to function with this system. All you have to do once you've installed it, or if they're a power user and they can install an application, they can log into the user portal and do it themselves. But once the application is on here, it's as easy as just going to connect and disconnect, and you just have to remember what your username and password is. It's very simple. So now if we refresh this screen, we can see there are no users logged in. So something you may have noticed, when we connected, there was an IP address that was assigned to us, 10.242 something something. So where did that come from? That doesn't match, obviously, our internal network, which is this. It doesn't match our WAN, which it wouldn't, but so it doesn't match anything. Where does that come from? So what you can do is go down to Remote Access. If you go to Advanced, I'm sorry, that's not where it is. SSL Settings, that's where it is. SSL Settings. So SSL VPN Pool is the network that it will use to assign addresses to connected users. So the one that we got was 10.242.2.2 because it doesn't use 0, that's the network ID address, and 1 is going to be the firewall's address. So if you need to access the firewall by IP and you're on the VPN, regardless of what the firewall rules are set up to. So remember how we had under profiles we had automatic rules. If you turn that off and you block all the traffic in your firewall rules settings, or you just don't set any firewall rules, you can always access the firewall by its IP address on the network that you're on currently, which would be 10.242.2.1. So if you don't like this, you can double click on it and you can edit that and make it something else. If you are running multiple UTMs and there's a conflict, you can change this to something else, and there really is no restriction. As long as it's a free range, you can use that. And down here is another setting you may want to change. This option will prevent or allow concurrent connections for each user. So if you want each user to be able, say, to have an active connection on their phone and on their laptop and on an iPad or something else, you would want this checked. If you only want one session per user, then you would uncheck that and hit apply. Now under Advanced, these are the specific options that it uses to set up the secure channel. So you can change these to anything you want. If you know what you're doing and you know what these are, you can set them to anything that you want to do. Now, one thing to be aware of is that once you change these, depending on what settings are changed, it may invalidate all of your SSL VPN configurations that are currently in place. So we just downloaded our profile and installed it and connected. So if we change some of these options, you may have to reinstall the profile. So we'll take a look at that real quick. So let's say we want to make this a little bit more secure. We can change that, and whatever we wanted to update here, you can change some of these options, and we'll just go ahead and hit apply. So now if we go down to our SSL VPN client, we'll try to connect again. And we'll keep an eye on our traffic light, and we'll just let it try to connect, and we'll see what happens now that we've changed some of those configuration options there. Okay, and it did actually connect, so we'll go ahead and view the log. So we can see here warning used inconsistently. So it's letting us know here that the remote server wants this, but we're actually getting this because that's what's set locally. So if you check here, data channel encrypt, it's using 128-bit key, even though we asked it to use 256. So in this case, what we'd have to do, it's still working, but it's not using your new settings. So that's not what we'd want. We want to have it use the new settings. So what we'll have to do there is we'll disconnect. And then we'll exit. We'll go back to our user portal, and this is where we'll use this option here. Since we already have the client software installed, this file will update all the keys and configuration without reinstalling the client software. So we'll download that one, and we'll run it. Let it install, and it's completed. And yeah, I don't know, this comes up sometimes, but that's fine, it worked. So we'll reopen our client software, right click, go to connect. And we'll wait for it to connect. Okay, we're connected now. So let's take a look at that log and see what happened this time. Data channel encrypt. So now it's using our 256-bit key. So that's exactly what we wanted it to do. Now it's using our updated settings. So we'll go ahead and just disconnect that for now since we don't need it. But that's just something to be aware of. If you do make changes to the cryptographic settings, it either won't connect depending on what settings are changed, or it may not use the updated settings. So it's important to just go ahead and set this up immediately right after you set up the firewall before you start issuing SSL VPN profiles, just to get that out of the way. So something else that we should take a look at is under the advanced section on the left, there's a place to define DNS servers that are provided to your remote access clients. By default, there's nothing set here, so your remote access clients will just use whatever DNS servers they're currently configured to use instead of some that are on your internal network. So if that's okay to you, then you can just leave this alone. Otherwise, if you'd like to specify DNS servers, you can fill in, for example, if you have an Active Directory domain at your business, you could put in the Active Directory primary and secondary DNS servers here. Or in this case, what we'll do is just configure the remote access clients to use the firewall as the DNS resolver. So in order to do that, you put the firewall's IP address in DNS server 1. And to confirm that, if you don't remember what it is, you go under Interfaces and Routing, and then Interfaces, look for your internal interface, and then we'll just copy the IP address that's listed there. We'll go back to Remote Access, then Advanced, and we'll go ahead and paste it in. And then you can leave DNS Server 2 as unconfigured. We'll hit Apply. Once we've made that change, we have to go to Network Services, and then under DNS, under Allowed Networks, we'll hit our folder to browse for existing objects, and we'll have to add VPN Pool SSL into the Allowed Networks for the DNS resolver. If you use any of these other types of VPNs, you'll have to add them to the list as well. So we'll only be using SSL VPN, so we'll go ahead and hit Apply with that being the only VPN type in there. And that should do it for our remote access DNS settings. So now something else we should look at. I mentioned earlier, and you saw since we set it up on Windows, the firewall provides client software, but it only does that for Windows. So if you're on any other operating system like Mac OS or Linux or iOS or Android for mobile devices, you'll have to provide your own. So on Mac OS, there are two choices that we recommend. The first is called TunnelBlick. It's completely free. The other option is called Viscosity. And this is a paid program. It's $14. and they do have a Windows version as well if you'd like to use that. But it's very nice in my opinion. I've used this before. It's what I use personally. I think it has a few features that TunnelBlick doesn't have. So it's up to you. You can get the 30-day free trial and see if it works for you. Otherwise, if you don't like it or you don't find that it's worth the money, you can get TunnelBlick for free. So if you're on a mobile device, if you log into the user portal on your mobile device, then you get 2 links down here for Google Play Store or the App Store. So if you're on an Android device, you'd click on Google Play, and it'll take you right to the application that you need, and you can install it from here. If you're on an iOS device, just click on App Store, and it'll take you to the official OpenVPN Connect application for iOS. So on iOS, once you have downloaded the OpenVPN Connect app, you would go to Safari on your device and then go back to User Portal, Remote Access, and then you would use this option to download the configuration for the mobile device, and you hit install, and it will prompt you to open up the OpenVPN config file in your third-party VPN application. So that's why you need to install the application before you try to download the configuration, otherwise it won't know what to do with it. So once you've clicked on the installation button for the configuration file, it will prompt you to open it with OpenVPN Connect, and then you just follow the on-screen prompts to accept the profile and add it to your device. Then it's all set. So I think that pretty much wraps everything up. This should be everything you'd need to know to get started with VPNs on your Sophos UTM. So if you have any questions about this, if you'd like us to help walk you through some of the setup, or if you'd like us to set up a UTM device for you from scratch, we are available to do those things. So just let us know. We'll put our contact information in the video description, and you can just contact us through there and open up a support ticket, and we'll get started on that for you. So anyway, thank you for watching, and have a good day.